People don't often think about steel and sustainability, but if you think about the future of enabling a greener economy, steel is essential to everything, right? Electric vehicles, appliances, power generation. And so at U.S. Steel, we actually have two different types of production. We have integrated mill, which uses blast furnace, and we also have electric arc furnaces. And those are more sustainable because they emit 70 to 80% lower greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a really big focus on sustainability because we were the first North American steel company to actually set a 2050 goal. And so a net zero goal. So with that, we also have an interim goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions intensity by 20% by 2030. And along that way, we have published a climate strategy report, which outlines a variety of different technologies that we will utilize to achieve our goal. And as part of that, we're excited to be on the stage with Carbon Free and Martin, because today we actually announced a definitive agreement. We're actually going to be building the first commercial scale carbon capture plant at our Gary Works facility in Gary, Indiana. And yeah, it's exciting. Thank you. We're very, very excited because this is going to be the first phase in what we think will be a really long partnership. And it's not only going to capture carbon emissions, but as Martin will tell you a little bit later, with their innovative process, it's going to turn that into a product, calcium carbonate, that could be used in a variety of different applications. So we're really excited about the future of steel. And yes, steel can be sustainable.
Great. So Martin, so carbon capture is something, since, we've been doing this for 3 years. We've been talking about carbon capture for 3 years, the challenges, the good and the bad of what's been possible. Talk a little about Carbon Free. Talk about that transition. As Erica mentioned, the byproduct, capturing the carbon and what you were able to turn it into previously, versus sort of what does the future look like of how do you use that sequestered carbon for future use?
Yeah, perfect. That's great. And we're very excited about the news today. So thank you for foreshadowing that, Erica. Yeah, so at Carbon Free, we're very much focused on mineralization, but we're hugely focused on profitability as a key part of sustainability.
Companies have to be profitable?
Sorry?
You mean companies have to be profitable?
It's amazing, isn't it? I know, it's right. You cannot go on with subsidies forever. So that's a huge part of what we do, and I think part of the partnership with US Steel. Our first technology was based on making baking soda. And one of the reasons, as you say, we've sort of grown and evolved and moved to our second generation Sky Cycle technology, which makes very high purity calcium carbonate. And this is all about, if you're going to convert carbon into a product, you need a market for the product, because that's where you're going to get the profitability from. So the calcium carbonate gives us a much larger global market. We've been able to work with US Steel on then developing the technology for their specific solution. And it's been a great collaboration to date. But our model is fundamentally based on the fact that you cannot rely on subsidies and support forever. We tend to forget, we have, Erica's already talked about US Steel's 2050 goals. So by 2050, we all globally want to be net zero. It doesn't stop then. Whatever carbon we're emitting by then, we still need to keep capturing. Yep. So this goes on forever. So you need to develop a profitable, sustainable model.
And when you look at the carbon capture industry, right, we've talked about, do we sequester it and put it underground? Do we put it into concrete? Your model is different. There's criticism of the overall industry of how you take that captured carbon. Do you see that conversation changing, as there are companies like yours that are actually creating products, byproducts that are profitably, sort of motivated?
That's certainly what we hope, and we want to be at the leading point of actually changing that conversation. We believe very much we're looking at carbon capture in terms of the art of the possible. We tend to talk about a lot of new ideas. I think Nicholas, in the first session, talked about we're very, very good at kicking the can down the road. So very exciting to hear about solar shielding, but we can't just stop doing everything else we've been doing and say, well, let's now bet on that as being the only piece. So we're going to have to do a lot of different things here. Carbon capture, pump it under the ground and store it under the ground, has been around for a long time. It goes back to the oil recovery days. It certainly could be a solution in the future, but in most cases, it's going to be 8 to 10 years on a permitting track before you can even start storing it then. With the project we're doing with US Steel, we will kick off breaking ground this year, and we'll be capturing CO2. We'll be making calcium carbonate in 2 years' time. in 2026. So we collectively, I think both companies are very much in the let's get on and actually do something. I'm going to steal Erica's line, she knows this thing, which is the
Go ahead,
go for progress is much better than perfection. Yeah. So let's actually do something rather than keep talking about it.
Great. So, you know, big company, startup, collaboration, we'll talk about partnership, but obviously a lot of times big enterprises look at various strategies, right? Build, buy, partner, right? So you could have internally tried to figure out a solution. You could have purchased, you know, bought another company that done it, or you could partner with a company like Carbon Free. And I know partnership is a big part of how U.S. Steel thinks about various strategies. You know, talk a little about how you went through the process of saying, okay, identifying the problem, and then figuring out, hey, okay, great. What is the strategy we're going to take? How are we going to find the right partner? And then obviously it was a year or so ago you signed an MOU. You know, today obviously announcing to move forward, but just how does a large company think about then partnering with a startup?
Yeah, so it's a variety. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. And when we first started discussions with Carbon Free, you know, it's like a relationship. It's like dating, right? You kind of get into it, you get to know what the company's goals are and values are, and when you start to understand that there are synergies with this kind of partnership that we have with Carbon Free, where we share the same outlook and we share the same, you know, goals in terms of wanting to help, you know, decarbonize the heavy industry, it just became sort of a natural, you know, next step for us to really go into exploration. And I think partnerships are really important in our space because, like you said, you know, we have some really bright, talented folks at U.S. Steel and the engineers, like looking at how we can get more efficient with our processes and reduce the amount of materials and reduce the amount of emissions. But, you know, that's one part. If we look at a big part of what we need to do is actually, you know, mitigate and reduce our emissions and then capture the ones that we do have. That's where partners like Carbon Free come into play.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you look at many of us who are familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, number 17 is partnerships, right? And sometimes people forget about that, right? They look at all the goals we're trying to solve, but a lot of this is that through partnership. But obviously there are challenges. When a big company and a small company come together, they have different risk profiles. They want to move at a slightly different pace. Usually with a startup, it's burning through their investment capital. They're like, we need to move faster so we can start generating revenue. Martin, talk about that from MOU signing a year ago to today announcing you're moving. You know, how have the two companies worked together to overcome, you know, some of those internal, you know, barriers? There's probably people inside of each organization that may put up roadblocks. How do you navigate, you know, a small company and a large company working together?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We do work at different paces and with different pressures. I'm certainly very aware of that as a CEO with people behind me. But it is building on this point of partnership. So I think you know, the way that partnership has worked with US Steel has been a multi-leveled relationship. So we had a really strong, so it actually started with Erica's team and sustainability. So our very first call with US Steel, we were introduced through our engineering partner, Fluor, as a potential solution provider. And the call was with a sustainability manager, Brenda, in Erica's team, and not with an engineering person or anything. We were then introduced to the Gary site as being a great opportunity, and there we found a couple of great engineering advocates. There's one guy there, Jason, who's just been a fantastic collaborator with us. Not an easy sell at all. There was pushback, there was a lot of challenging around the technology, and it was a true partnership. It wasn't, here's a solution, buy it, build it. We really developed the solution specifically for steel making with US Steel's input. There's no doubt about that. And then building the championship sort of upwards from the site manager, Dan, who's been a great advocate, and then getting into the C-suite. Pretty unusual, and I think it's worth, you know, for technologies like ours, you know, 150 million or so investment. You wouldn't normally get, you know, US Steel does much bigger projects than that. But because of the subject matter and decarbonization being so important to them, we were able to actually get face time at the effectively the boardroom, the C-suite.
And you need that buy-in
backup.
at all levels,
You need
right?
exactly. You need that backup. So that's how we help the pace, because that gave me some access to be able to say, maybe we need to speed this up a little bit. Sometimes you just need to be able to do that to keep things moving. But and a lot going on at US Steel at the moment, and that concerned us about being distracted, or whatever. But absolutely not. This has been from that team involved in this has been a singular focus to want to make this thing happen.
And that multi-stakeholder approach within an organization, Erica, you and I were talking. You spent over a decade at Dell, and I used the example of packaging for PCs. And one of your colleagues who I had done some work with said the immediate reaction when you say I want it to be more sustainable is, okay, great, it's going to be more expensive. But when you take a multi-stakeholder approach and you put different disciplines in the room and apply design thinking to approach a problem, sometimes you actually come out with a better solution. Sometimes it's cheaper. Talk a little about that team internally then at US Steel that's as they're looking at this that you needed to bring into the conversation from finance operations, and how do you build sort of that coalition internally to sort of make a project like this succeed?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think it takes a village. And that's the approach that we've taken. And Martin mentioned some of the functions, that we're working with. But I think what was unique about this one is that because we have an ambitious goal, it wasn't, there wasn't really any selling that needed to be done because we have a huge task before us, and it's to how do we reduce our emissions, right? And because of that, everyone basically just jumped in. And yes, we had many rounds of discussions, IRR, et cetera. But I think at the end of the day, if we have a North Star that we're all working towards, and we have really bright folks that are interested in helping to solve this problem, then it becomes a lot easier, to manage that from an internal perspective, right? There wasn't like this huge, business case of needing to sell and et cetera. It was just, it made sense, And one of the things that we're going to be talking about a little later, but the challenges around partnership, and I think that if one thing that we could change, it would be, and Martin's touched on it faster, could we have moved faster? Yes, potentially we could have, right? We could have reduced maybe our techno-economic analysis from months to weeks, but at the same time, we needed everything to be grounded in data, right? We needed to be sure that it made sense from an economic perspective, from a business perspective, from a strategic perspective.
And as we've heard, probably AI will help accelerate some of those data insights over time. But to both your point, the economic model has to work. We've heard this morning about philanthropy, government subsidies, as you've mentioned a couple times, Martin. But the economics of these types of partnerships have to work because U.S. Steel is not going to just continue to write checks to check the box around sort of emissions. Martin, why don't you talk a little about the economic model? Because you're coming in, you're taking some CapEx risk by building, providing a service, but now with this new model of selling the byproduct, talk a little about how you see that in the ability to scale. Because I think one of the things, again, we've heard is this death by pilot, right? Mm-hmm. Do a lot of pilots, test, but never truly scale the solution. How does the new economic model and the economic model you've built allow you to start here, but then to scale it to a broader set of facilities?
Great questions, Josh. Yes. So, I mean, carbon capture in its own right is a disruptive sector. We're all collectively building a new industry, but we like to think of ourselves as a disruptor within that disruptive industry. I think the death by pilot is a fantastic way of putting it. So, very early on in the business with taking SkyCycle forward, we said we'd done a lot of development work. Joe Jones is our original inventor, our CTO. Today has been working on this for nearly 20 years. So there's a lot of in-depth development being done. We've done a lot of work in proving out our demonstration rigs. And then yet the first conversation you have with a lot of companies is, oh, that's great, and we'd love to do a pilot plan for maybe 1,000 tons a year of capture CO2 or whatever. And I think one of the things we loved about US Steel was there was a hunger to actually start doing something meaningful because it meant something for them in terms of then their green steel, their Verdex. So that helped with the partnership, and I think that's very important, that you've got to have the confidence of your investors that you can move to commercial scale, but the faster you can do that, it takes years out of the cycle. Our approach then is to knock down the obstacle of, well, this isn't in this year's capital budget, and that was the conversation we had a number of times with US Steel, until there was a full understanding that we're not asking for a load of capital from the partner. We will take the capital risk on building our plant and our business out, and actually it will be funded by private investors who get a good return. We're not looking, there's no DOE funding or whatever in this project, because it's a great return. It's actually a specialty chemical plant using CO2 as a raw material, and it gives the sort of returns that you would expect from that industry. So you knock down that capital burden, and then there's an OPEX burden. So how much a ton is this going? That's often the investors ask. Yeah. How much a ton does this cost to capture? It doesn't. We make money per ton to capture. So it's a profit per capture per ton, so it's the big green bar, not a big red bar. So you knock down that. So then it becomes, okay, well, why aren't we doing this? And hence we get to the agreement that we've got today. So we think we've got this very disruptive piece. Then the big question is scale. So what we're building here is a first 50,000 ton a year capture. It'll capture 50,000 tons of blast furnace gas. It will also displace another 100,000 to 200,000 tons from the current process for making calcium carbonate. So paint manufacturers, food manufacturers will have a big reduction in their scope 3 emissions. So actually that 50 becomes 200,000 to 300,000 tons, a big multiplier effect. And that's the benefit of utilization over storage. If you put it in the ground, you get no further benefit out of it. Scaling, so our next phase, we're looking now at this year, scaling up the technology to the 250,000 ton module. So 4 effectively of those units becomes the 1 million ton, which then becomes that, by a lot of the big hard-to-abate industries is the big meaningful sort of numbers. So the beauty of our technology is it has a roadmap. So we will move into the high value, let's make the most money at the beginning. Then we can start to learn, bring the capital and the OPEX down. We can then move to lower grades of calcium carbonate. There are 5 billion tons of calcium carbonate sold in the world today. That's a lot of calcium and a lot of potential CO2 in that. So there'll be a learning curve, we'll move down then. And then ultimately, we can store the product.
Right.
But without pipelines.
Yeah, no, and so, so a year from now when we're sitting here, right, what does this look like differently, Erica? Like, as you think about, okay, it took a year from MOU to Gary to the first plant, a year from now, take all the learnings you've had from the last year. Where do you see, again, a year from now, us sitting here? What are we talking about? What's the progress?
Yeah, I mean, as Martin said, we hope to begin construction as early as this summer, and they'll become operational in 2026. So if I maybe flash forward 2 years from now, or maybe 3 years from now, I think, hopefully we'll say that this has been successful, and we'll be able to scale it to not only at Gary, but other locations. So we're really excited about the potential of this technology, and we're excited about the other opportunities that it may bring with it.
Great. So in closing, because I know we have startups in the room, large enterprise, quickly, what are the learnings and the things you would do differently that that the people in the room could learn from in the partnership, right? So you're learning and navigating how to work together. Anything quickly that you've learned that you would now do differently in your next partnership? So
I think 3 key things. One is transparency, making sure that you are comfortable and there's trust there so you can be transparent with each other. 2, it's communication, making sure that you're able to be direct and to surface challenges. And then the third one is expectations and making sure that those are aligned.
Martin, anything?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think trust is a great one. I think building that trust early on. I think when I talked about that broad team and then putting together that buy-in from the steel plant to the boardroom in terms of the C-suite is key. I think we might have driven some of that a little earlier to get that full breadth of sort of buy-in. Yet working together to develop sort of the trust. It will always take time on the first one of its kind. Obviously, we're talking to a whole range of other steel producers, and now so delighted that the US Steel has come first out of the block with this. They deserve the credibility for supporting us in that. But yeah, so we'll move faster as we move to other steels and across other sectors and other applications.
Great. Well, Erica, Martin, thank you for joining and sharing your insights. And you'll be around for the rest of the day. So hopefully we'll be able to have additional questions later on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, love to.